Well, hello and welcome to this English lesson about bigger and smaller things. In this English lesson, we'll look at about 25 word pairs, and each one will have a word representing something bigger. Like you see here, there's a bill. It looks like a $50 bill in the background, and then coins. So the bill would be bigger and the coins would be smaller. So in this English lesson, I will help you learn some new English vocabulary for things that are different sizes from each other. So once again, welcome to this English lesson about bigger and smaller things. Block and brick. Let me make these a little bit bigger for you. I think we can go supersize on these. So these are two things that we use to make a building, to build a building. In Canada, we sometimes build our buildings out of wood, and then the outside of the building might also have brick or block, or the building will simply be made out of block. So if you look on the far side, we often call that a cement block. Jen and I have a few cement blocks on the farm that we use for other things. Sometimes it's nice to use it as a weight because it's heavy. And other times we use it to, when we put a jack down on our machinery, sometimes we put a cement block under the jack. A little bit of a complicated explanation there, but two items that you use to build a building. Our barn, if you look in my English lesson videos, when you see the barn in the background, is made out of block, the big cement blocks. My house is actually made out of brick. So block and brick. Donut and donut hole. Now in Canada, we call this little one a timbit. But in most parts of the world, they call it a donut hole. A donut is a baked treat made out of dough, and then they deep fry the dough, and then they'll put chocolate or another topping on top. And then one day someone invented these little tiny donuts, and they called it a donut hole. It isn't actually from the hole in the donut, but it kind of looks like it is. But a donut hole is a small, sweet baked treat. It's very much just a tiny donut made into a ball. So a donut is big. A donut hole is small. I think if you eat 4 donut holes, it's the same as 1 donut. And again, here in Canada, we call this little one a timbit because we buy them at a cafe or coffee shop called Tim Hortons. And then their small little ones are called timbits. Kind of a fun and cute name. King size and normal size. So sometimes you are curious as to where I come up with the ideas for this lesson. Well, this past couple of weeks, I received a lot of different kinds of chocolate as gifts because it was the Christmas season. And one of them said king size on it. So king size simply means bigger than the normal size. You can have a king size chocolate bar. You can have a king size bed. But normally when I get a chocolate bar, it's like this one, the normal size. I don't often get a king size chocolate bar. So king size simply means bigger than normal. And I think it's called king size because it's fit for a king. It's something that's bigger than what normal people would eat. So if you were a king of a country, that's the size of item you would get. And then of course, tablespoon and teaspoon. So if I eat soup, I use a tablespoon. If I put sugar in my tea, I use a teaspoon. So they're just slightly different sizes when you compare them. If I am going to eat a bowl of cereal, I grab a tablespoon and I use that to eat my cereal with milk, lactose-free milk, of course. And then if I go to put sugar in my coffee or tea, I will use a teaspoon. So a tablespoon, a slightly bigger spoon than a teaspoon. And we do use these for measurement as well. Although when I make something and it says it needs a tablespoon of something, I use like a measuring tablespoon, like a special tablespoon that's exactly 15 milliliters. And a teaspoon is a special measuring spoon that's exactly, I think, 5 milliliters. Don't quote me on those measurements, but there are 2 kinds of tablespoons then. The kind you just eat with and the kind that you measure with, and the same as teaspoon. I'm sure they're pretty accurate. the ones that you eat with. But if you were baking, you probably want to use the real measuring ones. Loaf and bun. So when you buy bread, you usually buy a loaf of bread, and then you use a knife to slice the bread, and then you have slices. You might buy the loaf already sliced as well. But if you want to just make a small sandwich, or maybe you're eating a hamburger, you would just use a bun, which is actually kind of like a tiny loaf of bread, isn't it? A bun. I prefer buns with soup. When I have a bowl of soup, I will often have a bun with the bowl of soup, a bun with some butter on it. But when I make a sandwich, I'll often use fresh bread, where I will take 2 slices of bread and I'll put some lettuce and tomato and maybe some kind of meat on it in order to make a bread. But anyways, a loaf is big, a bun is small. They are technically the same thing. They're both a form of bread that you eat, of course. Cake and cupcake. So if it's your birthday, someone might make you a cake. They might bake you a cake. And a cake is big enough that you can slice it, and then people can all have a slice of cake or a piece of cake. On my birthday, I think I bought donuts, actually. We didn't have cake, but a cake is a common treat, a common dessert that people will eat. And again, you cut the cake into different slices or pieces, and you can have a slice of cake or a piece of cake. A cupcake is like a small personal-sized cake. It's big enough for one person to eat. So you might say to yourself, for my birthday, I'm going to buy a dozen cupcakes and everyone can have a cupcake. Or you might say, I'm going to bake a cake and then everyone can have a piece of cake. Bill and coin, I mentioned this one at the beginning. You in your country might have coins, which are small. I don't have any on my desk, do I? No, I don't. Which are small forms of currency. Or you might have bills, which are more like a paper form of currency, although it's a lot tougher than paper. At least the bills in Canada, they don't break very easily. Here you have a $5 bill and a $1 coin. The bill is obviously bigger than the coin. I have to say this though, I don't use money very often anymore. At Christmas, I got some money as gifts. Sometimes when you open a Christmas card or a birthday card, someone will put money inside as a gift. And so I've been using a little bit of money the last couple of weeks. And then it seems strange because I pay for almost everything now with my phone. You know, you just tap your phone, or sometimes still with my bank card. So anyways, a bill, a $5 bill, a $10 bill is bigger than a $1 coin or a 25-cent coin or whatever your coins are. Mountain and hill. Obviously, a mountain is so high that it gets snow on the top. A hill is any part of the countryside where there is a mound or something you can climb up on. A mountain is definitely way bigger than a hill. If you wanted to climb a mountain, you would need special equipment. You would need climbing gear. You would need to maybe practice climbing on smaller parts before you climb a real mountain. But with a hill, like even this hill, you can see there's a little trail going to the top. You wouldn't need any special equipment in order to go up that hill. So a mountain is definitely many, many times bigger than a hill. Lake and pond. So a lake is a large body of fresh water. When we say fresh water, we mean it's not seawater. It doesn't have salt in it. And a pond is a very small body of fresh water. So if you see a lake, and if you wanted to cross the lake, it would probably take some time to cross the lake. Although if you see a pond, you could probably walk around the pond in about 10 minutes. A pond is usually quite small. A lake will, of course, have fish in it and those kinds of things. And you can probably take a motorboat on a lake, whereas a pond is so small, you might not even be able to put a canoe or small boat in it. So a lake, big enough to go fishing, big enough to go boating. A pond, so small that you can probably walk around it in less than 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Meal and snack. So on the far side, you see a hamburger with fries. To me, that is a meal. If I was to have lunch or dinner, I might sit down at a restaurant and have a hamburger with fries, and I would consider that a meal. It's enough food to make me no longer hungry, and it's one of my main times of eating during the day. At breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you might sit down and have a meal. Although I must say we usually use meal to talk about lunch or dinner more. Usually we just call breakfast breakfast. I had breakfast this morning. I had a nice meal at lunch. I had a nice meal at dinner time or supper time. You can see close to me though, there are some crackers with, it looks like a slice of apple and some cheese. This would simply be a snack. This would be something you would eat between breakfast and lunch, or between lunch and supper, because you're a little bit hungry, and you would eat that as just a little snack, just so you have a little bit of food to fill your stomach a little bit before lunchtime or supper time arrives. Pie and tart. So a pie is a large baked item, very common in North America, very common in Canada and in the United States. You can buy cherry pie or bake a cherry pie, apple pie, blueberry pie. There are a lot of different kinds of pie. I personally really like apple pie, but a tart is like a small pie. So just as we had cake and cupcake, we also have pie and tart. When you have a pie, you can cut the pie into pieces and you can have a piece of pie. I'll have a piece of pie. I'll have a really big piece of apple pie, please, with some ice cream on top. Or you might just have a tart, which is just big enough for one person. So pie and tart. One is definitely bigger than the other. Jug and bottle. So when we go to town to get water, we fill our water jugs, that really big thing over there. I actually have one right beside me on the floor. We don't drink the water from our cistern because it's not that, excuse me, it's not that clean. It's not the best water. So we get jugs of water from town, and we don't buy our water because we can get water. We can fill our water jugs for free from the community water thing. But if we're on a trip, we might buy a small bottle of water so that we have something to drink while we are on a trip. You wouldn't take a jug of water on a trip. That would be a little bit crazy. Book and booklet. When you read a book, it's about this thick. You sit in a chair, you read the story, or you read about whatever the book is about. But sometimes when you buy a piece of furniture, you get a booklet, which is a very, very thin book. It might only have 6 or 8 pages in it. When you buy furniture from IKEA, there's often an instruction booklet, a small, tiny, tiny book that tells you how to put the furniture together. But a book is something you would get from the library. It will be written by an author, and hopefully it has an amazing story in it. A booklet is just something small. When you buy a TV or a piece of furniture, there will often be an instruction booklet with it that tells you how to use that item. Store and kiosk. So a store is an entire building, or it's a building inside of a building. That didn't really make sense. When you go to the mall, there are lots of big stores that have walls. When you go to town, there might be stores that are actual buildings, but a kiosk is just a little shop like this. In the mall, the kiosk is usually in the middle of the place where you walk, and then there's stores along the side. But a kiosk is a really nice place to go if you need to buy candy or something simple. A store usually is bigger and has far more items. Camper and tent. So we often call that a camper trailer or a camper. It's something that you hook behind your car or your truck, and you will pull it to the campground. So you will hook it up to your car or truck, and then you will pull it. A tent is, of course, simply made out of fabric, usually canvas or nylon. And it's something that folds up, and you can put it in a bag. And then when you set it up, it provides a place for you to sleep. It hopefully keeps out the rain, keeps out the insects, and all those kinds of things. So a camper is like a trailer. It can also be like a motorhome, can be a camper as well, like something that drives itself that you can sleep in. But definitely a camper is bigger than a tent, more spacious than a tent, meaning it has more room inside. Boulder and rock and pebble. So we have a few comparisons here. A boulder is a really, really, really big rock. That's the best way to describe it. You can't pick it up, but you can sit on it. There is a place near me where people will climb on boulders, and that's where the sport of bouldering came from. That's how it got its name. So bouldering is when you climb on rocks that are so big that it takes a few minutes to get from the bottom to the top. Whereas a rock is simply something like you can pick up a rock, you can throw a rock in the water in a lake or something like that and hear it go plunk. A rock is not nearly as big as a boulder. Although you could have a rock. Let me see. Is a rock always something you can pick up? No, you could have a rock so big that you wouldn't be able to pick it up as well. And then, of course, a rock like we just talked about, or you can also have a pebble, which is a very, very small rock. So when you go to the beach, there might be sand on the beach, but there might also be pebbles on the beach. And the pebbles might be really round and really nice to collect. Some people like to collect pebbles from the beach. Field and garden. So a garden is a small area where you can grow vegetables or flowers. A field is a large area where you can grow crops, or you can grow vegetables, or you can grow flowers. The biggest difference is usually a field is bigger, but you also have a field to grow crops to sell to make money. Whereas you might just have a garden to grow food for yourself. So definitely the size is different, and what you use it for can also be a little bit different. So a field is something a farmer would have. A garden is something that anyone could have. A lot of people will have a small garden where they grow things. Mansion and house. I do not live in a mansion. I live in a house. And let's check the pronunciation here again. Mansion. If you are extremely wealthy, you might have a really, really big house, and it might be so big that you call it a mansion. My house has 2 bathrooms. A mansion might have 14 bathrooms. My house has 1 kitchen. A mansion might have 6 kitchens. A mansion is, of course, a very, very, very big house. And then this on this side is a house, just a normal size place to live, where you can easily raise a family or live by yourself or with a partner, and have it be very easy to clean on a Saturday morning. I don't know if I would even enjoy living in a mansion because it would be too hard to clean. Uppercase, lowercase. So of course, when you write, you use uppercase letters when you start a sentence, or with formal names like Bob starts with a capital B, and you use lowercase letters for the rest of the words. So we sometimes say, so my name starts with the uppercase B, or what did I just say? Uppercase B, or I have to rewind this. Big letter B. So we have big letters and little letters. You could say that my name starts with uppercase B or with a capital B. There we go. And then all the rest of the letters are lowercase. So in this example, I have an uppercase T and a lowercase t. You use the shift key on the keyboard to type in uppercase. Road and trail. So a road is obviously a place where people travel regularly to the point where it has been paved or there is gravel so that you can drive vehicles down it. So when you are on a road, you want to be careful because there are going to be cars driving back and forth. When you're on a trail, however, it's usually for walking or hiking. You might actually see bicycles or e-bikes on a trail, and you might see snowmobiles or dirt bikes, which are motorized vehicles as well. But you'll know, like some trails will say hiking only, and other trails will say like, careful, this trail is also used by motorcycles, or dirt bikes. That's like a motorcycle for going off-road, or snowmobiles. In Canada, there are a lot of snowmobile trails. A log and a branch and a twig. So obviously a log is a very big piece of wood from a tree. It's probably from the trunk or from a very large branch. But when I think of a log, it's like this big around. Like a log is very, very big in the far picture. Sometimes after a windstorm, branches will fall off the trees and you will have to clean up the branches that are on the ground. So a log, usually from the trunk, or it can be part of a very large branch, but definitely bigger than a branch. And then branch and twig. A twig is just a very small piece of a tree. You might even call it a stick. Although when I think twig, to me, a twig is smaller than a stick. There's a branch, and then a stick is smaller than a branch, and a twig is smaller than a stick as well. And then, of course, you can have a tree, which is a large plant that grows, and you can stand under it in the shade. Or you can have a bush, which is a smaller, sometimes a bush can look like a little tree, but a bush is usually not very big at all. So just think of it this way. You can stand under a tree. You can't stand under a bush. It's simply too small. And then we have a molecule and an atom. Everything around us is made up of atoms, which are very, very tiny. Like you can have a carbon atom or an oxygen atom or a hydrogen atom. And sometimes those atoms connect to each other and they make what's called a molecule. I don't know what molecule that is over there. It's just from Wikipedia. But an atom is considered the building block of everything that you see around us. And a molecule is a formation of